So, uh, 20 years later, it's been about 20 years now that I've been following Jesus, and for my part, I can say I think I have less confidence in Christianity than I ever have, and yet more in the historic person Jesus. And what I want to try to explore this morning is what that looks like. I have a value, and that is that I don't want to be the kind of place or the kind of leader that has one type of conversation in the privacy of my own head or in my own relationships, but another one here. When you do what I do, you'll often hear these things said that it's something like, yeah, but I could never say that on Sunday morning. And one of my values is I refuse to be that person, and I guess if that leads me into heresy, then we'll just have to trust God on that one and trust your own ability to discern that. But I have this high value. In fact, I have a friend who I have a lot of respect for, but back in Billings, and he does things similar to what I do. And if you were to go to his house, you may or may not find a beer in the refrigerator, and that's all predicated upon who you are and what your bias is there. And for better and for worse, I can't get my brain around that. I respect him, but I won't be that. And so this morning, what I want to explore is the person of Jesus. Because I think one of the questions that we have to ask, we've been in this psalm called Psalm 23 for a couple weeks, and last service I did a review of it, but I'm kind of cutting everything and just trying to get back to the raw heart of what we were trying to do last service because it felt like a train wreck to me. I think the question we have to ask before we can keep moving into Psalm 23 is, how do we know the nature and character of the shepherd? Like the whole thing, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet water. Well, let's just say it. Let's just do this. So go ahead, let's go to that first one. If you're comfortable, let's just say it together. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake, even though for you're with me. You prepare a table before me. So the whole thing is predicated upon a fundamental conviction that the shepherd is good, and that we can know the shepherd's character, and we can be confident in the shepherd's nature. And I think before we can just plow ahead into this psalm, we've got to ask the question, how do we know that nature? And of course, you don't need me telling you that in our postmodern, post-Christian culture, that there's a grab bag of options out there. There are myriad options to go, how am I going to come to the conviction of who this God is and what this God is like, and even if I even believe in this God? But it strikes me that one of the things that Jesus said, and it didn't really land with me until last week, I wonder if Jesus knew what he was doing when he said, I am the good shepherd. Go ahead to that slide if you would. It's very simple. He just said, I'm the good shepherd. And I actually have no way of knowing, I'm not a good enough scholar to know whether he knew he was tying that back to Psalm 23 or not. But still, the question that we have to ask is, how do we know the shepherd? And on this one, I think one of the things we all get to do is pay our fee and make our choice. This is a statement my friend Fred used to say all the time, and I have great respect for him as a leader and a thinker and a person and a Christ follower and a husband and a friend and a community member. And he's very intelligent and very strong, and yet one of his values is we all have to pay our fee and make our choice. He was one of the first people to point out to me that you'd be hard-pressed to find a place in the Gospels where Jesus says the same thing to the same person twice. That the example maybe the best being his interaction with Pilate. That he just seemed to fundamentally refuse to have a war of words, but he respected that people are people, and his overall value was to say, we can't argue about this now. There's a place for dialogue, there's a place for conversation, there's a place for debate, but at some point, on some level, we all get to pay our fee and make our choice. Or the other statement that he would say often that stuck with me is, vote with your feet. And again, he was like, if you don't like the church, if you don't like the job, if you don't like the boss, if you don't like the person, if you don't like the town, then at some point you got to stop talking about it and stop griping about it and stop deconstructing it. And his point was, at some point you just vote with your feet. Go to a place where you can be for, not against. It's similar to, but not the same as, I had a friend, this one's a little more crass, but poop or get off the pot. Heard that one? I had a friend, a good friend actually, who was involved in this long relationship with this girl that started late in high school and went through college, and before you know it, they were in their mid-20s, and they'd been dating for something like 5 or 6 years, and there was mutual respect for the family, and everything was fairly healthy there. But at one point, admittedly, it was a pretty evangelical culture. At one point, her dad approached him in a very kind and respectful way and just said, hey, so you need to poop or get off the pot. Which, I know, it's a little crass, but it was his way of saying, like, you either need to make a commitment and let her make one to you or move on so that she can find someone who will. And I think on this Jesus character of God, kind of how do we determine who this shepherd is and whether or not he's good, one of the options that the text gives us is Jesus. And to me, it's important, and this is where we may have to agree to disagree, and you may have to vote with your feet, though that would be a bummer, that one of the areas where we have to be careful, I think, is confusing Christianity with the person of Jesus. And that's not trying to throw stones at a very easy target, other than just to say, I think the invitation is to constantly be returning to the person of Jesus and filtering everything else through that filter. Now, where this came alive for me was over 15 years ago. I was at a conference in Chicago at a church called Willow Creek, and it's this massive church. It was a student and 20-something conference. So I was there with my friend John, who was the middle school pastor, my friend Wes, who was the 20-something pastor. I was the high school person. It was a 3-day conference. And I don't know how you do at conferences, but I don't do very well. Like part of what happens to me, I love the learning, I love the new ideas, but part of what happens to me is generally in the first day, I attach to an idea or two, which comes with a book and a person and a list of podcasts and all those things, and I'm just excited to go chase after those ideas and concepts and questions and observations, and then everybody else is just annoying to me because I can't take any more in. You know what I mean? It's kind of like in college, I had a similar experience, maybe even you had this in college or high school, where I tended to get really excited about a particular class and then just kind of went through the motions with the other 4. And even now, I'm taking one class at a time as an alum at Fox, and I'm still doing it. She'll assign, the teacher, the instructor, whoever it is, what semester will assign 5 or 6 or 7 books to read. I tend to get really excited about one, and then I just kind of put in the time on the others. So that's just the way I'm wired. So at conferences, usually by the 3rd day, I start skipping, going to coffee shops, grabbing my moleskin, and kind of just trying to work on stuff, because the other thing we all know at conferences is when you get back home, real life starts again. And so if you're actually going to try to translate any of these ideas to your world, for me, it's always felt like it has to happen before I get on the plane again. So what had happened was my friends, they were the opposite, bigger intellects, bigger brains. They wanted to stay for the whole thing. And so I don't think I was pouting, but I was like, okay, that's fine. We'll stay. We won't skip out. And I went to the deepest, darkest corner of the auditorium. And this was a church that holds, I don't know how many thousand people. And I sat way up in the highest spot I could find. And I wasn't pouting, but I had no intentions of singing and no intentions of laughing at the jokes. I just, frankly, was going to pretend like I was listening, and I was just going to kind of dig into the stuff that I wanted to work on. Well, the guy who took the stage was too loud for that to be possible. He was a screamer, if you know what I mean, from a very different culture than mine, but he quickly got my attention. Now, I quickly came to know him as a guy named Ray Vanderlaan. He's from Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is the capital of, the Christian capital of that part of the country. So he was very assured and very knowledgeable and very like, rah. But I actually started to like what he was saying. So what I quickly learned, and have since learned more about, is that he is one of the preeminent experts on the Bible in its context. In fact, if you're interested in that stuff, that the World May Know, I think it's the World May Know Ministries, followtherabbi.org used to be the website, has some of the best content out there. In fact, I, because of this experience twice with different sets of friends, went to Israel and studied under this guy's group. But the point of his talk on that particular morning, and the part that was a little uncomfortable, was he really started by saying, how dare you guys call yourself disciples of Jesus? Which is kind of a weird way to start off a message. And what he went on to explain was what a disciple, or what the Hebrew word is talmid, what that meant in the original culture. And he explained that a Jewish boy growing up in Jesus' world, especially the Galilean world of Jesus, he didn't aspire to be the starting quarterback of an NFL football team. He didn't aspire to be a doctor, or I'm told that the number one occupation of elementary school students today is now entrepreneur. He aspired, and sorry, ladies, I don't mean to leave you out, but they left you out. But the good news is Jesus didn't, and that's part of what got him killed. I feel like every woman should follow Jesus, just because no person has ever given women more dignity. But anyway, I digress. So the deal was that these boys wanted to be rabbis. Like, that was the occupation. And so therefore, you had very few spots. Think starting NFL quarterbacks today. for a whole bunch of kids. And the mathematical probability of becoming a rabbi is not unlike, think of it this way. Let's just flip to soccer. Think of the number of third grade kids that played soccer in the United States today. And then think of the number of them that will ever play for the U.S. Olympic team. Like that was the probability. The best of the best of the best would become rabbis. And there was a very specific vetting process by which they weeded kids out. Because, of course, this was a culture, and I'm not convinced they were all wrong, that was a trades culture. If your dad was a fisherman, you were going to become a fisherman. If your dad was a tanner, you were going to become a tanner. And so by the ages of 12, sometimes 13, no later than 15, you were left with a very small group of boys who could become rabbis. And they would be invited to study under a rabbi, and they would study under the rabbi till they were 30 years old. And at 30 years old, they would have had all 39 books of the Old Testament memorized, like verbatim. And if you would have said, hey, and you would have made some obscure reference to some word, they would have told you where it showed up. The idea was they studied under their rabbi 24/7. And they weren't just studying concepts in Bible and theology, they were studying the person. The goal was that however the rabbi prayed after he came out of the bathroom, you prayed that way. However the rabbi held his fork or whatever they ate with, you held your fork or whatever you eat with in that way. In fact, the statement that's been made kind of famous since RVL was real influential on this was the statement that's been pulled from the annals of that part of history, which was this: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi, which was a way of saying, may you be so dedicated to your rabbi, may you follow your rabbi with such close proximity that the very dust from his sandals would make your Oakleys dirty. Like that kind of proximity and specificity. So RVL, he shares that story, which was about 20 minutes long and quite fascinating. You can Google it. There's this whole stage of things that Rob Bell did a lot of work on this. It's very, very fascinating. He concluded all that by going, so, how can you call yourself a follower of Jesus if you're not consuming his life? Now, his challenge, and this was just kind of blow your hair back stuff, his challenge was, and again, very black and white, very kind of Calvinist kind of a mindset, but this is what he said. He said, you, if you're a disciple, you should commit yourself to reading each of the 4 Gospels once a week for the next 3 years. Which, nobody's signing up for that, right? Like, let's be real. But the challenge that I took from that, where I didn't read it on those pace, but that did begin a season for me where I just unapologetically drilled down on the Gospels. I think, if I remember correctly, I made it a couple years where I was reading each of the Gospels once a month, which wasn't all that hard because I was a college student and I had lots of reading time and yada, yada, yada. But here's the danger of doing that. It raises lots and lots of questions. Because you don't always get the same answer about God when you read the Gospel of Luke as you do, say, when you read the book of Joshua. And there's these confusing things that come to the surface. But I wonder if that was part of the rationale for God sending his son, is recognizing a people who had been striving to understand him from lots of cultures, Jewish and others, and God went, okay, I think I'll put skin on it. And I wonder, dangerous? Yes. Taken too far? Yes. There's all kinds of different theological heresies like Marcionism. Marcionism is this denial of the Old Testament God and the acceptance only of the New. There's all kinds of historical, orthodoxical errors that can be made. But if a person's desire is to go, okay, but how do I trust the shepherd? I wonder if it benefits us from hearing Jesus say, look at the sparrows. Like, they don't have storehouses. They don't have checking accounts. They just know that God will feed them. And look at the lilies. Aren't they beautiful? And yet they're just lilies, like they're barely ever here. I wonder what happens if we take seriously Jesus' God-bathed world and we err to the side of his view of who God is and how he invites us to know him. Now, here's another way to potentially think about this. You know, I did student ministry along with Teresa and some of you here for 10 years, well, 9 years to be exact. It was funny because I didn't grow up even going to youth group. I was raised nominally Catholic. I went to CCD where we got in trouble for throwing snowballs, which someone last service told me he grew up in Southern California and they got in trouble for throwing oranges. which is in no way a shot at Catholicism. I just mean like I didn't know youth group culture and pizza and shenanigans and all that stuff. But I grew to love it. I'm not doing it anymore, but now I have kids that age. And I think in some respect I've thought about it more and I'm more confused by what works than I ever was. So here's what we have going on for those of you that don't know. We have a phenomenal group of middle school leaders who are already busy, who are trying to form connections with our kids on Wednesday nights at 326. We also have this phenomenal group of high school leaders who invite students into their home every Wednesday. So what happens on Wednesdays, and I'm just going to kind of bear down on the Wednesday high school piece, is Scott and Hannah Durga. You know Hannah because she's up here often, and then her husband Scott, and it's not a part of her job. They've volunteered in this since before she worked here, since before they were married. Scott and Hannah have high school students, 5 to 10 of them on a Wednesday night, along with Mikey and Kelsey, who join them. Kelsey's with child, so they're on a sabbatical. But basically, you have these leaders hosting high school students in their house on Wednesday night. And your part, if you're a financial owner around here, is you fund their having 4 Papa Murphy's family-sized pizzas that take them 0.6 seconds to consume, along with more Mountain Dew than they would ever tell us about and things of that nature. But here's been the interesting conversation, because this has been an experiment of we're just trying to figure out, like, how do we serve students? Because I think student ministry is changing a whole bunch in our day. When I was in Billings, if you had a youth group of 100 kids, you were in 3rd or 4th in town. Now I sense that if you had 100 kids in youth group in Billings, you'd be the biggest one in town. So things are shifting, and we're trying to accommodate that. And part of the conversation that we've had, Hannah and I have had more than any of them, is what do you want us to do? She'll say, like, what do you want us to teach them? Which is a reasonable question in a vulnerable place, because we're not giving them a program, we're not giving them a curriculum, we're just saying, we'll give you the pizza, you got to figure the rest out. And you know what I tell them? Like, what do we teach? What do we study? What do we do? Now, to their credit, they're teaching and studying certain things in a certain way. You know what I tell them? I don't care. I don't. I don't care if you talk about pop culture or the dating scene at the high school. I don't care. And it's not that I don't care, but you know why I don't care? Because I have incredible confidence in the people that Scott and Hannah and Mikey and Kelsey are. They're not perfect. I'm not naive. But I know them well enough to know they have their own experience with God. They have their own spiritual disciplines. They have their own values. They are freaking astounding people. And my confidence rests not in what they would teach or what they would say, but in who they are. My conviction is all of the wheels come off for all of us at some point in life. Now, that might be something as convenient as not getting a scholarship or as inconvenient as getting a girlfriend pregnant. That could be lots and lots of things. My conviction is that when the wheels come off, everybody wins, the parents and the student, if there's people like Scott and Hannah in their life that they feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling. And for me, that's the win. In fact, I had this experience here a couple months ago where somebody wasn't home on time. Well, it wasn't even not on time. It was just a little later than my control freak might otherwise hope. And I picked up my phone and I thought, well, I'm not a dummy. I'll just text Hannah and ask what time they left. And before I even typed the text message, I was like, no, I'm not sending that text message because it's not fair to the relationship they're forming. I don't want to be the mediator in that relationship. I want them to form their own relationships. My question is this: does God give us a system, a set of doctrines, or does he give us a person? Now, is there a false dichotomy there? Yeah, there is. But for functional purposes, what if Jesus is going, hey, the Good Shepherd? Like Psalm 23's got you all fired up about a life without fear and worry and all these different things. You looking for the Good Shepherd? I'm your guy. What if what Jesus is doing is funneling that into himself? And if that's true, wouldn't that simplify some of the most frustrating things that we have to face as people trying to understand God and the Bible and Jesus and Christianity and all those things? Because certainly it's not lost on you that if you open up your Bible and you read the book of Exodus, the way Moses directs people to handle a woman caught in the act of adultery is going to look way different than the way Jesus treats the man or woman caught in adultery. And it raises these questions of like, how do we reconcile a God in the Old Testament who says, oh, they don't believe in me, kill them all, with a Jesus who says, oh, you don't want to make room for people who don't believe in me? You're out of here. Like, how do we, and I'm not even willing to call them contradictions because I understand they're not. I do believe it's one God, but how do we make sense of that? And especially in a post-Christian culture, when your son or daughter shows up first semester of college and is trying to understand God, do we hand them a Bible or do we hand them the Gospel of Luke and go, listen, there's a lot of ground we could cover, but if you only spent the next 10 years reading Luke, we think you'll be all the better for it. Like, there's all these questions, aren't there? There's questions about science and faith, like Adam and Eve. I mean, do they have to be historical figures? And if they're not, what does that mean? Noah's Ark, did it really happen? And is there a difference between it really happened versus it's true? Like, in my mind, there is. It really happened involves genetics and science and biology. It's true involves a God who says, I made people, all of them, not just wealthy kings and not just men, people. And I made you for purpose, for something greater than yourself. And there's an evil streak that runs through creation despite God's maybe best intentions. And if you're not careful and you don't take it seriously, it'll ruin your life. But here's the good news. God is committed to doing something about that streak. See, there's these important concepts that are very advanced if we're really going to make sense of things, aren't there? Like the understanding between pre-modern and history and modern history. That for moderns, we need it to be true. Nobody's opening up the IR. Well, no one's probably opening up the IR, but you're going to the website. No one's going to helenair.com and looking for metaphorical, anecdotal truth. You're looking for historical facts. But we have to understand, don't we, that pre-moderns didn't see it that way. When they sat around campfires and told origin stories and family stories, it wasn't about that it happened. It was about that it was true. And then there's this whole thing of like progressive revelation. Like, how do we make sense that God says one thing to Joshua and another thing through the person of Jesus? Well, one option, and it's not the only one, and you don't even have to pretend like it is, but one option is something called progressive revelation. Now, progressive revelation is very uncomfortable, and it should be, because we can accommodate and account for almost anything via that logic. But that doesn't change the fact that even your most conservative theologians will say progressive revelation is a fact of the Bible. The question is, how far do we carry that fact? See, what progressive revelation observes is that the author of say, the book of Genesis had less experience with God and less to play off of and less to work from than the author of Isaiah. That the person Abraham, who I believe was a historical person, knew less of God than his son Isaac. And Isaac knew less still than say, Elijah or Samuel. And Samuel still, as advanced as he was and astounding as a person as he was, even Jesus seems to use a lot of Samuel references, knew less of God than did, say, the Italian prophet Malachi or Jeremiah. That there's a progression that happens that is somehow this God has inescapably committed himself to revealing himself through people, which creates limitation. And why does that matter? Because what progressive revelation would say in its most conservative approach is that progress, the progress of God telling us who this God is and what this God is like, it culminated with the person of Jesus. And the reason why that got so many people in so much trouble and flipped upside down so many religious ideas is because even Jesus' revelation was quite different than the one they'd come to adopt, believe in, and even die for. But at the very least, progressive revelation says the most holistic view of God is this person of Jesus, which has me wondering if in 21st century, post-biblical, postmodern, multicultural, religiously confused kind of world that we live in, if we don't do well to go, I can't speak very well to you about Christianity. And if I'm honest, major aspects of the Bible are confusing. Now, for my part, I'm not suggesting that I don't believe they're from God, they're not a gift, that they're not holy. There's all these things that we can, we can deal with those realities. But I can unabashedly, unashamedly, in fact, I can proudly yoke myself to the person and character of Jesus of Nazareth, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about there. And in fact, it's the most remarkable look at humanity and even God, in my view, that we've ever been given. what if Jesus knew what he was doing when he said, hey, I'm the good shepherd? And yeah, there's all this other stuff we can look at, but let's start with, I am the good shepherd. Did you know, this is one of the things Dallas Willard points out, I didn't know, that the Bible only offers one definition of eternal life? It's found in John 17, and I was going to read it to you, but I'm realizing I'm old and I can't read from my 3-font Bible anymore, so next week I'm bringing a Bible. John says this, now this is eternal life. And then he offers 4 systematic points. No, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you've sent. It's as if God is going, let me just kind of simplify and summarize. And what if he was right? John 1:1. And you start wondering, why did Jesus get killed? Here's why he got killed. In the beginning was the Word. We're talking about Jesus. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In other words, yeah, you have this long storied faith tradition, and I understand you're the great people of Israel, and yes, and yes, and yes, all those things. But Jesus, we're just going to simplify it with Jesus. And suddenly you start realizing, like, man, I kind of feel bad for the typewriter salesman. Because something has been updated, and how do we update without devaluing? You know, Hebrews is one of my all-time favorite verses, especially because of this theology, and we all like verses that support our theology. The Son is the radiance of God's glory in the exact representation of his being. Do you get the sense for why people were either for or against, dead or alive? This is insulting. If what you're trying to give people is a complex system, this is insulting. Colossians 1:15, one more of these kind of bullet point verses. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. What if God knew what he was doing when he said, I'm the good shepherd? And what if sometimes our response in the spiritual conversation is, yeah, I don't know how, I don't know that I can solve the riddle of Joshua for you. I don't know about Adam and Eve. Like, I don't know about the ark. I don't know, but here's what I can tell you. The tomb was empty, and Jesus is a stinking amazing person. And if someone made him up, I want to meet the people who made him up because their understanding of humanity and God is frankly inspiring. What if this is why Paul said things like the cross is foolishness, because it makes things so simple and yet so demanding? I wonder what happens if we can boil it down to this place. You know, another way that I've been thinking about this is, so you guys know I talk too much about baseball and how I love baseball and how my family's had no choice but to love baseball, but that's actually not entirely true. It was somewhat their fault that I fell back in love with baseball. But I've been around baseball for 35 years. I played it through high school. I honestly don't remember a day. I never had cable TV growing up, except for one time my dad had a friend who was the cable guy, and we'd string this long wire out across the living room, and we'd get cable on certain occasions. But I never got the paper, but I always knew where to find the paper. I can't remember a day since 1987 that I didn't always check the Cardinals box score. So I love baseball. And then now my family, we're involved with baseball. And one of my boys, he doesn't love baseball. He's smarter than all of us because he's figured out someone will pay you to ump baseball. So the rest of us are spending hundreds of dollars to play and watch, and he's making money while he umps. So I've been around it a whole bunch. And one of my favorite things is getting to just the relationships that have formed and the time that we get to spend. And, we're kind of OCD, and so it's not even just a spring-summer thing. We have a net in the basement, and we've met other people who like to practice baseball when everybody else is doing things out in the snow. And so one of my friends is my friend Todd, who's actually here, and he's as crazy as I am. He loves baseball, so we play all this baseball and coach all this baseball. But one of the things that happened this last summer was towards the end of the year, there's this guy in town who I've known of but not known. His name is Manny, and Manny used to play for the Helena Brewers. Now he's a dad, he has a family, lives here in Helena, and he pulled one of my boys into a practice session with him towards the end of, I think it was like early July, and that went really well, and Chase really liked working with him, and so that kind of changed our plans, and this last fall we did a bunch of kind of one-on-one stuff with Manny, and then I was telling Todd, and this is part of what I love about Todd, is like I was telling him, like, Manny knows his stuff. And there's two types of baseball coaches, in my opinion. There's those who know everybody more than everybody else, and then there's those who are convinced that they don't know as much as most people. Well, frankly, Todd and I fall into the, we're just dumb enough to sit on the bucket, but we don't know that much. So I've been telling him Manny knows his stuff. And so Todd invited Manny to come to this is how crazy Todd is in comparison even to me, is he gets a gym in town starting the first Tuesday in January. And so we practice Tuesdays and Wednesdays starting in January all winter long. Well, so we invited Manny. And Manny, first of all, English, of course, is a second language. So it's like a British accent, right? You just kind of, because he sounds like Mr. Miyagi. He's so fun to listen to. I've said that to him, so that's not offensive. But you pick up about every third word, but it's just really, really fun. And he knows his stuff. In fact, last week, Todd had to miss part of Tuesday, and he called me on Wednesday. He's like, hey, so how'd that go? And I caught myself saying this, and then later was like, yeah, this kind of helps me. I said, it went really, really well. But the more Manny's there, the more inferior I feel. Like, I've been around baseball for 35 years, and when I stand next to Manny, he could be teaching me cricket. Like, in comparison, that's how stupid and uneducated I feel. And in fact, he did it to me again this week. There's one kid who works really hard and has struggled a little bit, and he pulled him aside, and he was having this kid do something, and he had him up against a mat, and he was swinging a bat, and he called me. He was like, Adam, come here. So I went over there, and I'm acting like I actually know what I'm watching for, and he's like, watch him. So I'm watching him swing, and he goes, what do you see? In my head, I went, the same thing I've seen for the last 4 years. I don't know. What? And then he starts pointing out, and he starts pointing out all these specifics, and he's talking, and I'm just like, I shouldn't even be here. I know nothing. But it's a healthy kind of thing. We're not like, hey, we want to quit. We're just going sweet. This guy knows stuff that we couldn't. We've taught him, by the time they were done being 9, I taught him everything I knew how to teach him. So finally, a bigger voice. And here's what struck me this week. I wonder if what gets us all twisted up with this God thing is an inferiority complex. That rather than love the game or the person and say, of course there's people who know more about it than I do. And of course I'm never going to know everything. Rather than doing that, we get threatened. And we think the point is a rival. We think that the point is we've got God in this box. And so now I can rest secure that I know God. And I wonder if we wouldn't do better to go, yeah, of course there's going to be people who know more about him than I do, and there's going to be people who know less, but I don't care. In fact, I'd love to be surrounded by people who know more. I wonder if we do well to go, yeah, my goal here is to spend the rest of my life familiarizing myself with the person of God, and we also do that through people, right? That's part of what's happening. Is when you rub shoulders with other people who love the things and the people you love, everybody wins. Think of it this way, and we'll end here. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You've got 4 accounts, and they are not a story, they're not a story of some people, men and women, who had preconceived ideas of Jesus, followed him for 3 years, and had those ideas confirmed. Are they? They're a story of people who heard of Jesus, asked him some questions, followed him some places, wondered about some things, listened to him teach some things, went on some trips with him, watched the way he interacted with different people in different circumstances, saw what he was like when he was angry, saw what he was like when he was sad. And at the end of their lives, the reason they can give us a gospel, an account, is because they had their own conviction based upon their experiences with God. And I wonder if sometimes our in, out, right, wrong language is not helpful. And if we wouldn't do better to go, okay, so there's Jesus the person, there's the Word the person, and there's the Word the book. And I don't believe they contradict, but I do believe that when I can't solve the mystery of the Word, the person, and the Word, the book, I'm going with the person, which is what Eastern Orthodoxy does, by the way. So here's my challenge is, what if in one sense RVL was on to something? What if it would be worthwhile to spend the next couple years just slowly working through a gospel. Nobody even has to know what you're doing. You can download the Bible app and just do it in context we wouldn't even want to talk about. Just reading through slowly. And I wonder if what will happen to your experience is, on the one hand, you'll be more and more confused about how to be a proud member of this thing called church, and at the same time, hold your confidence in the person, not the system. So, let me pray. God, thanks, Lord, that you sent your Son. And thanks, God, that all the confusion and the frustration, at least we have options. And that one of those options is we can boil it all down to the person of Jesus. And that we can rest in the fact that the tomb was empty. And that somehow you disrupted something you seem to have started by saying all you need to know about me is found in the life of my Son. God, would you help us as we do that to understand what that means to be humble in our convictions and to be convicted, that it wouldn't just be a device of convenience that allow us to head off in a billion different unhealthy directions, but that we'd see that would lead to a very, very simple kind of faith, but simultaneously a very demanding one. Because the win wouldn't be our quiet times, and it wouldn't be our church attendance, and it wouldn't be our charity. It would be loving you and people around us the way you would if you were us. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.